Welcome to Living the Sweet Life with Azucar. Living the Sweet Life with Azucar is a podcast by mental health therapist, spoken word artist, author, screenwriter, and playwright Simone Nicole, better known as Azucar, discussing what it is like to be creative in the working world in her interview segment Ask Azucar, finding solutions to any mental wellness questions in her Q&A segment Work Well Wednesdays, and spilling the tea in her special bi-weekly dating episodic Welcome to the Sugar Factory. Subscribers receive goodies on Freebie Fridays according to their tier level. Please remember to join the Sweet Teas on patreon.com/LA Sugar Factory. Tuning in to another episode of Ask Azucar. I am here with a special person that is creative beyond belief. I'm going to let her introduce herself and then we'll go about it.
Hi guys, my name is Shima. I also go as teatime_with Sheems on Instagram as well as TikTok.
So tell everybody what you do, what are you working on, all those things.
So I primarily write. Right now I'm focusing more on my kind of like poetry career. But I do also like to write short stories as well as fiction books, mainly like crime and like mystery. I have 2 of those in the works currently, but right now, since I'm focusing more on my poetry show or my poetry book, I'm getting that together. So that should probably be out maybe like sometime next year. I'm hoping for fingers crossed the summertime. But yeah, like currently I'm going to a lot of different poetry shows again, trying to get myself back out there. And just really trying to make sure that as my first legitimately like published piece of work, that it kind of encompasses like everything that I went through since like starting to write the poems, because some of those poems were written at the beginning of college or like, like end of high schoolish kind of stuff. So it kind of is just like an amalgamation of like from then to now, how I've kind of like grown and the ways in which I feel like I've also closed a certain chapter that I was in for a while.
So I have questions brewing, but I want to start with, when did you start writing and why?
I've actually always been a writer. My mom likes to tell this story about when I was probably about like 1 or 2, actually more like 2 or 3. And I would like scribble on like a paper and then I would tell her like this whole like fleshed out story. So I guess you can say I've been a writer since I was like 2 or 3, but legitimately the first time I think I remember writing a poem, I was maybe in like middle school, maybe in middle school. I kind of started to just like dibble dabble in like, the normal like Dr. Seuss, like maybe I could be the next Dr. Seuss and like, write like the best like rhyming book. And then it kind of just morphed into something else from there. And it kind of was just driven off of, like emotion, like I tend to write when I'm overwhelmed or when I'm just going through a lot of things and it's like there's a lot in my head. So I just need to put it on paper in order to kind of like look at it from an outside perspective. So yeah, I've always been a writer. In terms of actually writing like my fiction books and stuff like that, I'd also say probably like middle school. So in terms of fiction writing, I've started actually in middle school as well. In English class, we used to have it was like a portion where she would like force us to write just like off the dome for like 40 minutes. And it didn't matter about what, you just had to consistently have like pen to paper. And that's actually when I fleshed out the first story that I'm actually like probably like a quarter of the way through currently. But I've done like lots of different revisions as I've gotten older, like switching up certain things, switching up the plot. So I kind of dabble in like a little bit of everything creative wise, but in terms of like writing specifically.
Okay. So what I have come to realize after doing all of these interviews so far is that middle school is the time.
Yeah.
Like middle school is the time where we all pretty much have like, yeah, we dabbled before we hit like 11, 12, but once we get to middle school, it's like we are on and like we have hit the, what do you want to call it? The runway of creativity. So I think it's quite interesting. And the birds are talking again. So so tell me a little bit about like since you've been writing essentially your entire life, what is it like for you to have writer's block, or what does the break look like? And what advice can you give people that are going in that period to get to the other side?
Um, in terms of poetry, I'd probably say, I do have like my lulls. I feel like currently I am actually about to enter into a lull because so most of my poetry kind of spans from very emotional things that happen to me. And I feel like because I have made peace with who my muse was, I now like there is no real need for me to write about that chapter anymore. So it's kind of like the fire burned for like a long time and then now the fire is like finally like quieted down. Um and with that I kind of still try to, find music that really inspires me or like really like there's something about like the song that like I can't get out of my head or the type of feeling. And then I try to take that and translate that onto paper. So I tend to write to music a lot. So most of my poetry is either to a song or to like a line in a song. And most of the time, like since I'm an avid like music listener, if I'm having like writer's block in poetry, I'll usually turn on or like try to find like a song that I feel really inspired by, or like it's just something that I'm weirdly attached to in that song. And I'll just try to, whatever comes into my head, I'll just try to write it down. And even if I don't like it, I'll just keep it there for a while. And then until I kind of feel a little bit more like, okay, like maybe like I know how to flesh this out a little bit better. That's when I'll like dive into it. In terms of writing story wise, I feel like that's a little bit different because poetry, it doesn't have to be such a long, cohesive like body of work. So you kind of have a little bit more flexibility when you hit writer's block for that. Um, I'm actually trying to get over the current writer's block that I have with the other two works that I'm currently working on. Um, and so I think how I'm going to approach it is probably by starting to do more like writers workshops, and to, even if I don't really know what I'm going to write next, if I write for 10 minutes a day, at least I progress the story 10 minutes at a time. And I also have a bad habit of like going back and like editing while I'm trying to write the story. So that I feel like could also be coupled with like writer's block. Like you go back and you try to continuously edit and edit and edit so that way you can have like the perfect story, and then you assume that it'll lead you to where the end is when you kind of just stay stuck in the same portion of the story.
Yes.
Because you keep editing all the past things and saying, oh well, maybe I should write that different, or maybe I should do that differently. So yeah,
There's
like
always a part two, y'all. Like if we take this little snippet, write it out,
definitely.
then edit it.
Mm-hmm.
If you strike a genius and say, "Oh, I should have written it this way," just write a volume two.
Exactly. And you never know. Maybe as soon as you finish it, you're going to understand the entire like plot point of the story. Like you're looking at it from like the first and the middle. So now you're like, oh, but I still have to write the end. But like, I want the end to end up like this. Like, just write the story and then just go from there at the very end, because that way you'll have the final product in front of you and you'll be able to just be like, oh, okay, that's where that's supposed to fit in. That's not supposed to be there. and it just makes the process like completely easier.
Yes. And I'm going to piggyback off of that. That actually happened to me. Like when I wrote Side Piece Sanctifications, which is my second book, it's about a relationship I was in and I didn't know the guy was married. So all of the poems are fresh. I didn't edit anything. It was all the emotions throughout the entire relationship, which then led me into going into film school after my friend read it and was like, "Oh my gosh, I want you to write me a movie." And I was like, "What? I'd never done that before." And then like a week after that, I went and uh, and applied for film school. I say this to say that once I started to like go out back on stages like you were doing,
Mm-hmm.
people started telling me all these different competitions and all these different things to
Mm-hmm.
do. And I was like, well, I don't have anything fresh. And then I was like, you know what I should do? Because everybody loves side piece sanctifications and I cannot keep the stock. Like I have like two left in this stock and I'm gonna have to reorder pretty soon. So if y'all want the last two, feel free to ask me.
Jump on it.
Um I sat down and I started to write is literally called Side Piece Sanctifications, What I Should Have Said. So, like, you have all of my raw emotion in book one,
Mm-hmm.
and then book two is going to be all of the therapized, psychologyized
Mm-hmm.
version of what I should have said to the man, the wife, and the mother. You know,
100%.
versus me going from pure emotion, but now I'm going to take the same story and go from, well, as a mental health therapist, as a family therapist, this is what I should have done,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
give it to you in creative piece. Now,
Agreed.
if I had gone back and edited, you guys won't be able to eventually experience both of the journeys and be like, oh, well, she can be raw and we can still be smart at the same time. It's allowing us to like feel everything and be everything. Like just stop censoring our own self in our own life.
And it's also like showing the entire journey instead of just like giving an edited version of the journey. Um, because at first, for years people have been like, oh, like why don't you just throw all the poems that you have right now into a book, just publish it. But I'm like, okay, but like what if like so and so reads it, and what if like this doesn't get received well, and I'm a little bit embarrassed that I wrote a poem like this about a situation like this. And then as the older I got, I kind of was just like, I forgot who said the quote, but it was like, if you wanted me to write about you better, you would have behaved better. And it's like poetry is also from your standpoint. So it's like, even if somebody were to rival and come out and be like, okay, well, that was wrong, this is how it went. But it's like, okay, but you weren't looking at it from my shoes, though. Like, you can't tell me how to write about you if this is how I interpreted that you acted. Like, that's crazy.
And like 10 toes down, once I'm able to pick back up the other segment of the podcast, which is Welcome to the Sugar Factory, it is about that specifically. Like there's guys calling me like, did I really act like that? Like that's how I experienced you when I was 17, 18, 24. Like that's how I experienced you. So if you have a problem with that, then it's doing its job of like, having us rethink our actions and think like, how can I be better for the next one? That's the whole point of the podcast. That's the whole point of the TV show segment is like me looking at, the bumbles of being in a relationship and trying to figure it out to help everyone else try to figure it out. We're not always going to be perfect. And like, we don't always have to be tied up with a bow. I love the fact that through poetry, and if you follow us as writers, you see how we grow as writers, and you can figure out a point where you can be like, "Oh, I've been on this ride with her before," or "Oh, I felt this emotion before." So I get that because I was there, and now that I see you in a different space, and now that I see you mentally grown, and your writing has grown as well as you have healed yourself, like we can bring them on that journey, and we can help them through that as well through our stories and through our poems.
Agreed. Completely agreed.
What was the hardest either story to start, poem to start, or the scariest topic that you ventured into so far?
Um, I feel like I think the hardest poems to write were about my first heartbreak, I'd probably say. And I know that sounds super cheesy, but I was in college. It was my senior year, COVID, met like
For
this guy.
emotions, girl.
Yeah, met this guy, essentially ended up falling in love with this guy. Didn't even know that I fell in love with him until my counselor, my therapist at the time was like, I think you loved him. And I was like, is that what this all feels like in the aftermath, like when it doesn't work out? And she's like, yeah, like that's what that is. Like, and I remember I had never okay, so before then I was in a writer's block because I would just write about like everybody else, but it wasn't like it would be like 2 poems, 3 poems here about this guy or that guy. And then everything that happened, and I just had like it was like like a faucet without like any way to turn it off. And it was like I would write like 3 poems a day, 6 poems a day. Like I would listen to music and I'd be like, oh my God, like this is exactly how I feel. And then I was going through more counseling. I felt like I had healed after like, like maybe like 4 or 5 months. And like looking back on it now, I'm like, okay, like that was not going to take 4 to 5 months. Like that was just like, you kind of were a little bit overzealous at that point. And then I got into the relationship that I'm in now, with my boyfriend, love of my life. He's amazing. And I remember still feeling like, why do I still feel like an untapped faucet? You know what I mean? Like, why do I still feel like I have more to write about if I'm in a completely different phase of my life? But recently, like around the beginning of this year, like in April, that guy hit me up again and essentially was like, hey, like I just wanted to apologize because, like I really shouldn't have treated you that way. And, I just really wanted to say that I'm really sorry for what I did and you deserve better and you deserve this and you deserve that. And it sent me into the same tailspin that I was in 3 years ago, because I had been able to essentially like package it away in like all the little poems instead of actually like being like, okay, what is the root of the issue and like where was I intending on like taking this towards the end? You know what I mean? And at the very end of it, I kind of sat there and maybe like 2 months ago, like I had like it was like an epiphany that I feel like I've had before, but I just wasn't ready to sit with it just yet. And I had written a poem where there's a part of the poem that was like, you know what, like, I think I always meant to clean out this room, but I just didn't want to like throw away all of my hard work. And I feel like at that point in time, I recognized like it was my hard work that led me to have all these feelings. It was my hard work that led me to view you in that way. And I remember like writing about it and then feeling a little bit like embarrassed to kind of like put it out there, because I kind of was like, oh, like, I don't want you to know that you had me feeling like this for like the better part of this much. And, like, I didn't want you to feel like, like I wasn't, strong enough in order to go through all that. But at the end of the day, now I'm like, well, I think you also realize that you were wrong. I think you also realize like, you know, dating a writer or somebody who writes in general, like, you really have to be on your P's and Q's, because it's like, if you're not, however you are depicted on that page, that is set in stone. And it doesn't really matter whether or not, like, like you apologize. Doesn't matter whether or not, like, you were like, oh, well, I didn't really mean to. on paper you sound like a villain. And
Right.
I am perfectly okay now with portraying you as a villain, having portrayed you as a villain. And it's like, now I think now that I feel like I have officially healed and come to terms with everything, I feel like now that I don't have any more poems to write, or I don't have like that much ammunition, because like writing poems like that kind of just feel like I'm like, oh, like I feel like I'm writing the same thing, or oh, like it's just not hitting the way it used to. Now I feel like internally and like mentally, I'm like, you know what? I think that signals the fact that I'm done. I'm over it. Like, you know, I have fully healed and I've fully moved past whatever this is. And I'm also not ashamed to publish works in which like, this is how I felt. And this was very unfiltered to me. And if you took it that way, you took it that way. Like, we could argue about it, but that's still a solid poem though. Like,
Yeah. And that's what we saying. Be careful.
mm-hmm.
When you're in any kind of relationship with a writer, you will become a character.
Literally.
So you better be on your P's and Q's and cross your T's and dot your I's, because we are writing about our experience. If you happen to be in it, you happen to be in it. If you're not ready, I'm sorry, boo. Like, that's just what it is. And you go to school, and I'm letting everybody know, like, literally, first class of film school, they tell you, write what you know. And what you know is your life. So if you were in my life, you're going to be in something. But the way how I do it is like, your name will be changed. Maybe your job will change. But
you're in there.
Plenty of material. Like, being Mary Jane was nothing compared to my life. Are you serious? Like, I got season 3 up of content for at least Welcome to the Sugar Factory itself. And that's just one of the you know, the steps on the avalanche. So like, I'm proud of you for being able to see when you got to the healing point. But I also, as being a fellow poet and like understanding the ebbs and flows of emotion driving our creativity, I then want to challenge you to figure out what other deep emotions that you can still tap into to create poetry, because it doesn't always have to come from relationship. It doesn't have to come from love. It can come from friendship. It can come from you learning about yourself, loving yourself, you know? Like, so, and I feel like that's a thing that that's a journey, at least that I'm seeing, that we're all going through. It's like, we always start with our heartbreak. And like, we unpack that. And then as the more we get healed, the more our topics expand into different levels of love, or different levels of experience, different levels of existing. Do you feel like that kind of seeps into your story writing, or is it like a 2 separate process for you?
2 separate process in terms of like what exactly?
As far as like muses and topics.
I want to say like it's all together sometimes, because funny enough, just last night I was talking to one of my friends, and I've also talked with this about with my other friend as well. And the question is always like, do you have to be very sad in order to write something good? And I literally told her, I was like, you know, my trauma makes my poems even better, because the way in which they mesh together is just seamless, where it's like, one of my friends, Kendra, she was like, oh, Shima, like, why don't you write like happy poems? And I tell her all the time, I'm like, you know, about my current boyfriend, Noah, I don't really write poems about him. Like, on my hand, I can probably say I've written like 5. And it's because I'm happy. And so like, there is nothing for me to write about. Like, I don't have like any...
You're experiencing.
Exactly. And like I don't have any issues that I need to put on paper. And she was like, "Yeah, but like try to see if like you can come up with good poems and also not have to be like in such a sad place." And now that I'm putting together this book and I'm putting together like all the different poems that I've made, I'm like, I feel like I probably am going to take a small break from poetry after, like I'm able to like finish this until I can, I guess, feel a muse, or until I can develop a muse in like a different form of, or in like a different area of my life. And like, I don't know, like I would love to, I've started maybe like 4 or 5 poems where it's like, like I would love to write the best like love poem. Like I've always wanted to write a happy poem. And my issue is always like, dang, like what am I supposed to write about like if I'm happy? Like, like I'm happy, like I'm here, I'm enjoying it. Like all I'm gonna write about is I'm happy. Like whereas like if I'm sad, I'm like, wow, like this is how I felt, this is how you had me fucked up. Like, this is what I had wanted to say, but I couldn't. And I feel like it's just a little bit harder to write about happiness because you are in it, you are experiencing it in the moment. Whereas like sadness, like it kind of like lingers with you for a little bit longer, and it kind of forces you to like put a voice to it that it doesn't have. Whereas like happiness is like, yeah, like we kind of just here right now and we're just doing this right now, and it's a good memory to think on later.
Happiness, the way that you're looking at it, at least, if tell me if I'm wrong, is like happiness is an experience. And I don't normally have this experience that often, so I'm gonna milk it up as
Mm-hmm.
much as I can. Sadness and depression kind of linger, so they're always gonna be like they're my homeboy, like they're my
Yeah,
homegirl right here.
100%.
So like we got time. Like
Exactly.
I'm this happiness, so let me enjoy her, let me enjoy him first, and then
Mhm.
we'll like in my mind, I then go like, all right, Lord, if this is supposed to be my forever happiness, there will be, poems and stories to come if this is where I'm living right now. But I'm not living here. I'm visiting.
And it's also, I used to have, so a couple years ago, like when I was still like dating around, I would write a really happy poem, and literally the next poem I'd write about that person, it would be an extremely sad poem because things would just go downhill. And so I always felt like as soon as I like put pen to paper and it was like, oh my God, I'm so happy about this, I'm so excited, the universe would be like, or like God would be like, you know what,
Wait
you
for
weren't supposed to do that. Sorry about that.
wait for the
And then
shoe to drop, and the shoe dropped.
and now I'm sitting here and I'm like, you know what? I should have never wrote that poem because as soon as I write a poem about you, and I think I actually told this to one of those guys, I was like, I don't want to write a poem about you because as soon as I write a poem about you, this is going to go up in flames. And he thought I was joking. And he was like, no, 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 like read me the poem, read him the poem. He loved it. And then it low key went up in flames. Like, and I was like, you see what I'm saying? You should have never, I should have never wrote.
Because this is like a funny situation. I'm laughing because the
It
amount
is hilarious.
of conduit that we are, and like
Yes.
the fact that there's a connection, and I'm telling you this, I'm putting my therapy hat on right now. So I'm telling you this, like you put yourself in this trigger loop, right? So now you've seen in your life, like, oh, if I actually memorialize this happiness, it's going to end.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't write.
Yeah.
And ain't nothing wrong with that because I want you to fully experience all your emotions and fully be in the happiness state. And however long it takes you to like make sure 10 toes down, 10 fingers down that this is going to be forever, like do what you got to do. But I just don't want to put that in your brain of like, oh, so
If I write about
it
something happy.
connected. I created a connection here where if I write about something, it's going to end. When in actuality, not all the time, right? But right now, in our current reality, that's what's happening. So tread lightly, you know.
Yeah. I will take that advice. Thank you.
So at any point, you definitely can change that trigger. But right now, you're enjoying it. I'm not telling you to change anything. Or just a little nugget to think about for later.
Thank you.
That was part 1 of my interview with Shima. Stay tuned next week for the part 2 and more juicy things. Thank you for listening to Living the Sweet Life with Azucar. Check us out on Instagram at La Vida Dulce Pod and at LA Sugar F on Twitter, and join the Sweet Teas crew on our Patreon to get behind the scenes access, exclusive first looks, and customized Azucar Welcome to the Sugar Factory merch. Check out our website, sweetlifewithazucar.libsyn.com, and don't forget to DM us at La Vida Dulce Pod for your questions for the Work Well Wednesday segment. See you next week with Welcome to the Sugar Factory and the next installment of Sugary Scandal and Entanglements.